We are on the record, and the time is approximately 11:11 a.m. This is the beginning of the videotaped deposition for Jeff Hensel. Would counsel present please identify themselves and who they represent for the record?
Jeb Butler and paralegal Kate Dondero for the Walden family. Also sitting in is Mike Rafey of my office, also representing plaintiffs.
Diane Owens on behalf of the defendant Chrysler Group, LLC.
Thank you, counsel. Will the court reporter please swear the witness?
Yes, sir. If you'll raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
This will be the deposition of Lieutenant Jeffrey Hensel taken pursuant to notice in the case of Walden against Chrysler. Deposition will be taken pursuant to the Georgia Civil Practice Act for all purposes permitted under the Act, including use at trial. Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury your name, please?
Jeffrey L. Hensel, Hensal.
What city and state do you live in?
I live in Canton, Georgia.
Now, we're in Atlanta, Georgia today for this deposition. Is that right?
That is correct.
What is your job, Lieutenant Hensel?
Currently, I am assigned to the Atlanta Police Zone 2 Criminal Investigations Commander.
Is that with the Atlanta Police Department?
Yes, ma'am. Sir. Excuse me.
How long have you been with the Atlanta Police Department?
18 going on 19 years.
And you've reached the rank of lieutenant?
That's correct.
Do you have any specialized training in the area of accident reconstruction?
Yes, I've gone through quite a few accident reconstruction courses. Took all the courses in the state of Georgia to get certified as a accident reconstruction specialist.
Tell the jury, if you will, what accident reconstruction is.
It's, to take evidence and testimony from a scene and putting it all together and come up with some assimilation as to what occurred using facts and other information.
It's basically figuring out what happened in a wreck.
That's correct.
Are you authorized by the Atlanta Police Department to do accident reconstructions?
Yes, sir, although right now that's not my job title. I'm not in that field, but I am. They do consult with me now and then on certain cases.
How many car wrecks have you investigated in your career?
In the thousands. I've been a police officer for 36 years, so there's quite a few.
Do you know what underride means in the context of a car wreck?
In the context that I use it and used in terminology, yes. Do you want me to explain it?
Please do.
It's when usually in a rear end to a front collision, the rear car goes underneath or submarines underneath the back of the front car.
Is that common in your experience?
Objection to the form of the question.
You can go ahead and answer.
You could answer.
Okay. Yeah, that's when braking is involved, it's quite common.
We may have objections as we go through this deposition,
Okay.
and it's always going to be like that.
That's fine.
One of us will object, you can answer anyway.
Okay.
Did you investigate a Jeep fire wreck that occurred on or about January 26, 2001?
Yes, I did.
Where were you when you got the call to go to that wreck?
In my apartment in Atlanta.
Could you see any part of the wreck from your apartment?
Yes, I could see the smoke coming from the interstate.
Did you go to the scene of that wreck?
I did.
Did you ultimately investigate that wreck as an accident reconstructionist?
I did.
Are you okay?
That's not it. That's my son. Don't do that.
Sometimes, yeah, I think you're all right. When you investigated that wreck, did you use your training and experience in conducting your investigation?
Yes, I did.
Did you create a report based on that investigation?
Yes, I did.
Did you analyze the physical evidence on the scene of the wreck?
Yes,
Did you inspect and analyze the vehicles that had been involved in the wreck?
I did.
Did you take witness statements?
I did.
Did your investigation permit you to reach certain conclusions about what had happened?
Yes, I did.
Tell us what happened in the wreck, if you will. What car hit what?
As I recall, there were 3 cars that were actually involved in the physical contact. There was a Camry, there was the second vehicle was the Jeep, and the third car was a Ford Thunderbird. Go ahead.
That was a Jeep Cherokee, wasn't it?
That's correct, yes.
And tell us how the Jeep got hit and by what car.
The Jeep was, as I said, the second car in line. It was struck in the rear by the Thunderbird.
I've brought some models with me today, model cars, and using those, I'd like to ask you to show us basically how the wreck happened. Now, these cars don't exactly represent the cars that were involved in this wreck that you're talking about, but I'd like you to use the black Jeep that I'll hand you to represent the Jeep Cherokee,
Okay.
and the blue pickup truck to represent the car that rear-ended the Cherokee, which I think was a Camry.
No, it was a Thunderbird.
Thunderbird, excuse me.
Yeah, the Camry was the one in front
Oh, I see.
of the Jeep.
So using those models, just show us, if you will, at what angle the impact occurred.
Basically, it was a straight-on rear to front impact. Because of the deceleration and the braking, the front of the Thunderbird was down and depressed, and it submarined or underrode the back of the Jeep. So it was a straight-on shot in the back of the car.
During the course of your investigation, did you have occasion to learn where the gas tank was located on that Jeep Cherokee?
Yes, I did.
Where was it?
It's pretty much as depicted in this model. It's right exposed to the rear back of the vehicle. You can actually look at any Jeep and of that model and look and see the gas tank is exposed to plain sight.
Let me go ahead and show you what I've marked already as Plaintiff's Exhibit 11. And that's not the Jeep that was involved in this wreck. It may not be the same color, but does that look basically like the same type of Jeep Cherokee that you saw involved in the wreck that you've been describing?
It's pretty close to the same, yes.
Is that thing circled in red, the gas tank?
That is.
Now, what happened to the gas tank in the collision that you investigated?
It was crushed from the force of the Thunderbird striking it.
Did the tank leak gas?
It spewed gasoline everywhere.
What
And
happened to that gas? Did it catch on fire?
It erupted into a giant fireball.
I'll ask you in a minute about the consequences of that giant fireball. But first I want to show you some pictures of that Jeep I'm showing you now. Plaintiff's Exhibits 1 and 2. Are these...
I'm sorry, I'm confused because mine says 4 and 5.
Those are marks that are on the pictures beforehand. I've marked
Okay.
them for purposes of this deposition with stickers like this. 1
On,
and 2.
thank you.
Lieutenant Hensel, are these Plaintiff's Exhibits 1 and 2 for this deposition pictures of the Jeep that was involved in this wreck?
They appear to be, yes.
Based on your recollection of the Jeep as refreshed by these photographs, was most of the crush to the Jeep forward of the rear axle or behind the rear axle?
No, it actually terminates at the rear axle.
I'm sorry.
It terminates, the crush damage terminates at the rear axle.
Does it appear that the rear axle actually stopped most of the crush or damage?
Section of the form of question leading.
I can't make that judgment, but the damage does, there is no damage forward of the axle, and the axle is intact itself.
Let me ask you that question again because of the objection. How would you describe the damage to the Jeep Cherokee in relationship to the rear axle?
It's terminates at the rear axle. It's the crush. If you look at the Exhibit 2, you can see that on an intact Jeep, there's probably 2 feet of overhang from the rear axle to the thing, and it was crushed in all the way to the axle. So that was all-inclusive area that was compromised during the accident.
You referred to the picture that I handed you of a Jeep Cherokee. I think, for the record, it's actually Plaintiff's Exhibit 11.
Oh, I'm
Is that
sorry.
right?
Yeah, I'm looking. I thought Roman numerals. Yes, we could say that.
Who was inside the Jeep Cherokee when it was rear-ended and the gas tank crushed?
There were 3 occupants. There was Mr. Belli, Mrs. Belli, and their infant, I believe, daughter.
What happened to, was Mr. Belli driving?
That's correct, yes.
What happened to him on the scene of the wreck?
He was the front seat driver occupant of the vehicle. When the Jeep caught fire, he obviously was subject to that fire, as you can see by the burn damage on that photo. He was engulfed in flames also. He exited the vehicle but didn't get far. And the witnesses got him on the ground and tried to extinguish the fire he was engulfed in. They ultimately got the fire out.
His body was burnt.
Yes, he was very seriously burnt.
Did your investigation reveal that he said anything as he left the Jeep on fire?
Witnesses stated that he was claiming my family or my daughter or something to that. He was concerned about the occupants of the vehicle, which is obviously was his family.
What about Mrs. Belli? Did she survive?
No, she
Objection to
didn't.
the form of the question.
Actually, I want to ask a different question anyway. To your knowledge, did Mr. Belli survive?
He did not.
Did he go to the hospital?
He survived for a few days, but his burns ultimately led to his death.
What did your investigation reveal about what had happened to Mrs. Belli, the mother?
My investigation, I found the other 2 occupants, the mother, Mrs. Belli, and the infant, still inside the vehicle, burned beyond recognition. She was in a sitting position, would have been directly behind Mr. Belli.
This is Mrs. Belli.
That's correct. She is, in the photo, as you can see, where her remains, she's still sitting up in the seat behind Mr. Belli. And the infant child is on the floor, I believe, laying partially on the right side, and her back is burned open, and you can see the insides of the child.
I'm going to show you now some photographs I've marked as Plans Exhibit 3 and Plans Exhibit 4. Are these also pictures of the burned up Jeep after the wreck?
Yes, they are.
Looking at Plans Exhibit 3, it appears, it's not a great picture, but it looks like there is something back there in the seat behind the driver's seat. Can you tell us what that is?
That is Mrs. Belli's upper body. I believe that's what's left of her skull and her head.
If we turn to the next page, which I think is Plans Exhibit 4, this picture is taken looking into the door behind the driver's door. Is that right?
That's correct.
What are we looking at inside or through the rear window there?
The right part, you see Mrs. Belli's remains to the right side, just barely visible through the vent part, and the small child's remains are there in the middle of between the seats, or on the floor there.
This wreck, in which the Belli family burned, occurred in 2001. Is that right?
Objection to the form of the question.
Let me ask it again. Did the wreck in which the Belli family burned occur in 2001?
Objection to the form of the question.
I think this may actually be a different report.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But the answer is the same. Pull out this one and I'll ask you, or look at that, then I'll ask you again. It's going to say January 26 of 01, I think.
Yes. My report reflects that it was recorded and done on,
Let me ask you one more time so we get a clean go of it. Did the wreck in which the Belli family burned occur in 2001?
Objection to the form of the question. My problem is with the use of the word burned because I don't think it's been established that the other two occupants died from burns. And I don't think he can say that. So that's my problem with the question, is to use the word burned.
All right, let me ask you this. Did all three occupants in the Jeep Cherokee sustain burn injuries?
Objection to
did.
the form of the question.
They did.
I'll ask it again. Did the wreck in which the Belli family burned occur in 2001?
Objection to the form.
The answer was yes.
Did Chrysler find out about that wreck?
Yes, they did.
To your knowledge, did the Belli family actually sue Chrysler following that wreck?
Objection to the form.
Yes.
Sometimes I'll ask you to repeat it if
Okay.
her objection steps on your answer.
Okay,
so
that's
that
fine.
we
No, I
can
understand.
hear it on
I
video.
understand.
I'm not trying to step on your answer.
I'm just so programmed from being in court that, not to say anything after an objection.
Sure.
This is unusual for me. Go ahead.
Let's see. Now, did you give a deposition in the case in where the Belli family sued Chrysler?
Yes, I did.
Was there a Chrysler lawyer there at a deposition asking you questions?
That's correct. There was, yes.
Did you tell Chrysler's lawyer about the wreck and about what you saw in the wreck?
I did.
Did you tell Chrysler's lawyer about your investigation?
I did.
Were you ready and willing to tell Chrysler whatever questions, or strike that, were you ready and willing to answer any questions that Chrysler asked about the wreck?
Objection to the form of the question. Go ahead.
Yes, I was.
I'm going to show you some selected pages from the transcript of your deposition in that case. And I've marked this as Plaintiff's Exhibit 5.
Can I move these up?
Sure. Now, on the first page in the top left, does it say in the caption, Belli against Daimler Chrysler Corporation?
I object to the procedure you're using. Ask him to testify by showing him and ask him to report from excerpts from his deposition. I don't think that's proper procedure, so I'm going to object to this line of questioning and the use of the deposition in its action.
It's relevant to notice to Chrysler. Does it say, turn to the next page, if you will. In the bottom right, is that your name down there, Officer Jeffrey L. Hensel?
Yes, it is.
And then the first part of the examination is Chrysler's lawyer announcing he's there on behalf of Chrysler. Is that right?
Objection to the form of
Yeah.
the question. That's not what it says.
The first part of the examination says, quote, Officer Hensel, I'm John Campbell. I'm here representing Daimler Chrysler Corporation, which is a defendant in the lawsuit that's been filed by the Belli family. Did I read that correctly?
You did, yes.
Now, during this deposition, did you tell Chrysler that the fire started from a ruptured gas tank on that Jeep?
Yes, I
Objection to
did.
the form of the question.
Turn to the
Yes,
next
yes.
page. Turn to the next page, if you will. And you'll see there,
For the record, which page of the deposition are you now referring to?
I'm about to get to that. If you turn to the next page, you'll see there in the bottom right, deposition page 41. And I'm going to ask you about page 41, lines 4 through 17. I'm going to read that, then my question will be whether I read it correctly. Question. All right, as part of your investigation at the scene of the date of this accident, did you try to make any determination as to what started the fire that engulfed the vehicles? Answer. When you say what started it, question. The origin of the fire. Answer. Well, to me it was pretty clear when I examined the vehicles, where the propellant came from. But what wasn't clear is where the ignition source came from. Question. Okay, answer. The ruptured tank on the Jeep is definitely the source of the petroleum substance which splattered everywhere. Did I read that correctly?
Objection to the form of the question leading improper use of a prior deposition. You may answer.
Yes, it was correctly read.
You referred here to a petroleum substance which splattered everywhere. Is that gasoline?
That is gasoline, yes.
Did you tell Chrysler in this deposition what happened to the infant daughter, Nicole Belli?
Objection to the form of the question. You may answer.
Yes.
turn with me 2 pages over, please, and we'll look at deposition page 54. And I will ask you about lines 1 through 6, and my question will be whether I read it correctly. Does your answer say, quote, "The second victim, the young Bella, the female, when I observed her, she was face down in between the seats. She had extensive burns to the anterior of her body, more specifically her right rear side. There was exposed organs from where the fire had burned off part of her skin," end quote. Did I read that correctly?
Objection
you
to the
did.
form of the question, improper use of deposition and leading. You may answer.
Yes, you did.
We talked about some witness statements that you took. Do you remember saying you took witness statements?
Yes.
Did you make those witness statements a part of your report?
Yes, I did.
Was your report available to Chrysler just like it was available to members of the general public?
Yes, it was.
Did you talk about your report and witness statements at your deposition?
I did.
I'm going to show you now what I've marked as Plans Exhibit number 6. Is this one of the witness statements that you took?
Yes, it is.
I'm going to ask you about the bottom part of this, beginning with the words, "as I'll read it, and my question will be whether I read it correctly." But before I do that, this typed portion here in the middle of the page, this is what the witness said. Is that right?
That is
Objection to the
correct.
form of the question.
Is this typed part in the middle of the page what the witness said?
Yes, it is.
And it says, quote, "As I continued looking north, I saw and heard a collision and saw a fireball heading directly towards me. I grabbed the retaining wall and pulled myself up. The fireball, a Jeep Cherokee, impacted the rear of a dark sports car about 10 feet from where I was standing. As I turned, I saw burning fuel all over the interstate, the Jeep totally engulfed in flames, and the dark sports car about 50 to 100 feet further down the interstate. I ran to the dark sports car, got in the passenger side, and saw pieces of flaming wreckage laying back on the driver. His feet were near the pedals and his head was in the passenger side footwell. His torso was draped over the center console. I threw the burning pieces out of the car and dragged driver out the passenger side. He was not conscious. I wanted to get him away from the fire as soon as possible. The Jeep was about 30 to 40 feet west of the dark sports car and was totally engulfed. While dragging the driver south away from the fire, I saw the driver of the Jeep outside his vehicle standing and pleading for help. He was totally covered in flames." Did I read that correctly?
Objection
Yes.
to the form of the question, leading, improper use of a deposition. It's also misleading to quote only the excerpt you've quoted. Now you may answer.
As to the second part of that objection, you're welcome to go back into it in cross-examination. As to the
My
first
obje-
part, it's a proper means of establishing notice to Chrysler.
My objection's on the record. I'm not going to argue with you about it until it's time to.
Okay. Subject to that objection, which Chrysler still has, did I read that correctly?
Yes, you read it correctly.
Now, this deposition, before I ask this next question, you'll probably need 5. I will ask you about the date of it, which is should be right in here. Now, we've spoken about the deposition that you gave to Chrysler in the Belli case and about the witness statements that you discussed with Chrysler in your deposition in the Belli case. What year did that deposition occur?
2002.
To your knowledge, Lieutenant Hensel, did the medical examiner look into the Belli wreck?
I believe that they would look into the deaths. That's their job, is to do the forensic investigation into that.
And the medical examiner's job is to determine the cause of death. Is that right?
That's correct.
To your knowledge, did the medical examiner reach any conclusions regarding, quote, diffuse axonal injury, end quote?
Objection to the form of the question.
I have heard that. I don't have, I don't have the report in front of me, so it would have to be, but I believe that to
Well, let
be
me-
somewhat correct.
Let me ask you this. had you ever heard, you and I met yesterday, I think, is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Before then, had you ever heard the term, quote, diffuse axonal injury?
No, I haven't.
Now, did you hear anything from the medical examiner or the medical examiner's office about, quote, diffuse axonal injury in connection with the Bell wreck?
I don't recall at this point. It's been so long ago. We occasionally got the reports from the coroners, and they went into the files. And, you know, they were, I don't recall seeing that one.
Did you speak on the scene of the Bell wreck with emergency medical personnel, paramedics, and folks like that?
I did.
Do you recall any of them mentioning some kind of, quote, diffuse axonal injury, end quote?
I've never heard the term prior to, I can't remember that term being spoken to me.
Well, you went to the hospital after this wreck to visit with Mr. Bell, right?
I believe on 2 separate occasions.
When there, did you ever speak with medical personnel?
I spoke to the doctors about his prognosis and, you know, to see if and when he was going to regain consciousness. I was anxious to get a statement if he was going to survive.
When you spoke to medical personnel, the doctors and whoever else in the hospital, do you recall any of them saying anything about, quote, diffuse axonal injury, end quote?
No, I did not.
I think you said you investigated thousands of wrecks.
That's correct.
When you do an accident report, is part of your job to make a quick summary of injuries in the wreck?
Yes, it is.
Have you ever had occasion to report a, quote, diffuse axonal injury, end quote?
No, I don't know exactly what it means, so I would not use it.
I'd like to ask you about a different wreck now, Lieutenant Hensel. Did you observe the scene of a wreck involving a 1999 Jeep Grand Cherokee and a Hearse on or about August 14, 2001?
I did.
Tell us how you came to see that wreck scene.
I was traveling in the roadway in the same direction. It's a one-way street, and I came up upon it, and they were on the right-hand side of the road, so I stopped to find out what was going on.
Was that Spring Street in Atlanta, Georgia?
That's correct.
Were you able to observe the damage to both the vehicles involved in that wreck, the 1999 Grand Cherokee and the Hearse?
I did.
Were you able to speak with the drivers?
I did.
Were you able to observe generally the scene of the wreck?
Yes, I did.
Tell us what happened in that wreck, please.
The Jeep was the vehicle in front, which was the first vehicle in line. And she was attempting to stop and turn into a parking lot right there. And apparently the hearse driver didn't see her in time and struck her in the back and pushed her up onto the side of the road.
How severe was the impact to the 1999 Jeep Grand Cherokee?
I think I classified it as a lower speed impact, 35 miles an hour or less.
Well, was the force of the impact strong enough to cause serious injuries to anybody involved in the wreck?
Objection to the form of the question.
No, there wasn't very, I think minor abrasions on the driver of the hearse had a small cut on his hand, and I think the driver might have complained of like a sore neck or something, but no real significant injuries.
In case the objection to that question is sustained, I'm going to ask it in a slightly different way. Was anyone involved in the collision? Strike that. Did anyone involved in the collision have any serious injuries?
No, they did not.
Did you notice anything unusual about the 1999 Jeep Grand Cherokee after the wreck?
Yes,
What was that?
a punctured gas tank,
Was
or
the,
a leaking gas tank.
was the gas pouring right out of the gas tank?
Objection to form.
It was seeping out at a steady stream. It wasn't pouring out.
Was the describe for it in case that objection is sustained. I'm going to ask a slightly different question. Describe for us, if you will, where the gasoline was coming from and how fast it was coming out.
The upper right-hand side of the tank, because of the the attitude of the vehicle being up on a slight incline, most of the fluid was against the back of the gas tank. It was coming out at a pretty good stream, it was running down onto the ground and making a small stream go down the roadway. So it was very noticeable, and it was quite a bit of a hazard.
Did the gasoline catch fire?
No, it did not, thank God.
If there had been a spark or an ignition source like there was in some other wrecks, could the gasoline have caught fire?
Objection to the form of the question.
Most definitely, it could have ignited.
I'm going to show you some pictures here. I'll show you some pictures here that I've marked as Plans Exhibits 7, 8, and 9. What are these pictures of?
Pictures of a Grand Cherokee, and these are the vehicle that was involved in the wreck on the date in question.
Okay. I'm going to return to it and I'll ask you a couple questions about them later, but that first picture there that says gas tank leaking written in the rear window, doesn't it?
Yes, sir.
Does that show about the extent of the damage to the rear of the Grand Cherokee?
That was it.
Based on your experience in investigating, I think you told us thousands of wrecks, is it unusual for a vehicle that has sustained damage in that amount to be leaking gasoline on the roadway?
Objection to the form of the question.
I have never seen such minor damage result in a ruptured fuel cell, or a punctured fuel cell, I should say.
Were you able to tell whether the gas tank on the Grand Cherokee was hit directly by the Hearse?
Yes, I was.
And was it hit by the Hearse?
Yes, if you look in Exhibit 9, it definitely shows hard contact damage from the bumper of the Hearse.
In your experience, is it unusual for the front of a striking vehicle to be able to directly hit the gas tank in a rear-end collision?
Objection to the form of the question.
I'll answer it prior to the Belli case. I had never seen it that I can recall, but because of the Belli case, it was heightened my awareness. This was the second time that I saw a gas tank hit by a vehicle and compromise the liquid inside.
The Belli case was a case where you gave a deposition. Is that right?
That is correct.
Did that also involve a Jeep?
That it did.
In your experience with rear-end collisions, how common is it for the front of a striking vehicle to directly hit the gas tank if the gas tank is located forward of the rear axle?
I've never had it experienced it.
I'm going to show you another picture. This one I've marked as Plans Exhibit number 10. Now, I'll represent to you that this is a picture of a 1999 Grand Cherokee with the rear plastic fascia removed. And I'll further tell you that one of Chrysler's engineers has admitted under oath that this picture is correctly labeled. Now, looking at this picture, which is marked as Plans Exhibit number 10 to this deposition, and it was Exhibit 3 to a previous deposition, what part of the Jeep Grand Cherokee was struck by the Hearse?
The part labeled fuel tank.
I'm going to hand you a blue Sharpie and ask you to circle the part of the, circle on Plans Exhibit 10 to your deposition, the part of the vehicle that got hit by the Hearse.
It's the lower part of the gas tank.
Now, you mentioned a minute ago a case called, and we talked about a case called Belli against Chrysler. Is that right?
That's correct.
Did Chrysler have a lawyer there at that deposition asking you questions?
Objection asked and answered.
Yes, they did.
I do not, let's go off the record for a second.
Time is approximately 11:46 a.m. We are off video record. The time is approximately 11:47 a.m. We are back on video record.
What was my last question, Marty?
Did Chrysler have a lawyer there at the deposition asking you questions, and Miss Owens objected? The answer was yes, they did.
Okay. In that deposition, Lieutenant Hensel, did you tell Chrysler's lawyer about this wreck involving the 1999 Grand Cherokee?
I did.
Were you there ready and willing to answer any question that Chrysler asked about the wreck involving the 1999 Grand Cherokee?
Objection form. You may answer.
Yes, I did.
Turn to Exhibit 5, if you will, which is the transcript from that deposition. I think you've got it right there. Did you tell Chrysler in this deposition that even after the minor collision into the rear of the 99 Grand Cherokee, gas was leaking from the gas tank?
Objection to former question.
Yes, I did.
Turn to deposition page 60, if you will. And I want to draw your attention to page 60, line 11 through 61, line 2. I'll read it and ask if I read it correctly. Question: are you certain it was gasoline that was coming out? Answer: oh yeah, there was no doubt. I know it was gasoline. Question: how much of it? Answer: when I saw it was trickling out on the ground. The truck, the Jeep, had been pushed forward and up into a small pine tree. So its attitude was that the nose was up a little higher. So most of the gas that was in the tank was back against the back of the tank, and it was running out. It was trickling out pretty good. It wasn't a gaping hole, and it wasn't rushing it like pumping it out, but it was running out like a steady flow, coming out. And it was maybe if you punctured it with the tip of a pencil, maybe 3/4 or 1/2 inch in diameter, that amount coming out of it. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you
Objection to
did.
the form of the question on the grounds previously stated, improper use of a deposition and leading.
Yes, you did.
You told Chrysler that when this deposition was given back in 2002. Is that right?
That's
Objection to
correct.
form.
Correct.
Lieutenant Hensel, I'd like to ask a few questions about what motivated you to come here today to this deposition. You described earlier seeing the body of the daughter, Nicole Belli, in the rear of that burned up Jeep. Is that a picture in your mind that you had forgotten about till I asked you about it, or is it something that has stuck with you since the wreck?
I'll never forget it.
Are you being paid to be here today?
No, I'm not. I'm compensated by the city. I'm on their time.
Why did you agree to come?
To try to mitigate or eliminate this ever happening again. Unfortunately, I guess your case, another child was killed in a similar wreck, and whatever I can do to prohibit that from happening in the future, I'll do.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Lieutenant Hensel, let me ask you a few questions, and I'll start with Mrs. Belli and the baby daughter, Belli, who were killed in the wreck on Interstate 85. Do you have any information as to what the cause of death was for those individuals?
I don't have the cause of death.
When you, I'm sorry to bring this up, I know it's not pleasant to think about. When you saw Mrs. Belli, she was still seated in her seat?
That's correct.
And could you see brain matter, an obvious injury to her skull?
She was melted. I mean, it was just a mess.
So there was obvious damage that had occurred from the fire and after death?
Well, I don't know if it was after death. The fire did cause devastating deformation of the remains. So,
And whether
as to what the sequences were, I can't speculate on that.
So the bottom line is whether the Mrs. Belli and the child were killed by impact or killed from burns or smoke, you don't know. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. Now, in terms of that accident sequence, the Belli accident sequence, the accident happened on Interstate 85, is that correct?
That is correct.
And it was in the early morning, around 6 o'clock or so?
Yeah, it was just prior to daylight, so yeah, it was probably very early.
And do you recall what lane of travel the Jeep Cherokee was traveling in?
HOV lane.
And you indicated that there were 3 vehicles physically involved in the accident in response to Mr. Butler's questions. Is that correct?
That made contact, yes.
There was actually a 4th vehicle involved that precipitated this accident sequence. Is that correct?
It was a mechanical malfunction that
Right.
caused that, yes.
A breakdown. A van had broken down or lost a tire,
Yeah, it was a little hub, the whole wheel assembly came off of it.
and because of it had broken down and pulled off into the HOV lane, there was a sequence of events that occurred as a result.
No, the van didn't pull off to the HOV lane. The van pulled off to the breakdown lane.
Okay.
There was another vehicle that had struck the thing that was in the breakdown lane on the left-hand side next to the HOV lane. And the first car in the line, the Corolla, I believe it was. Camry had also struck the wheel and stopped in the HOV lane.
Okay. And so, from your investigation, did you determine that the Bel Jeep Cherokee had come upon this scene of the van being in the breakdown lane, the Camry being in the HOV lane, and had stopped?
No, I didn't say it stopped. I said, from my conclusion of the investigation, that it was in the process of slowing to circumnavigate the obstacle of the Camry sitting in the roadway.
Did you make any determination as to what the speed of the Bel vehicle was at the time it was struck by the Ford Thunderbird?
I think in my report, one of my reports, I think I said it may have, I estimated that it may have slowed down to 30 or 40 miles an hour.
Okay, can you find that for me? And I think this is your report here. We'll mark that packet. Well, first of all, let me ask you, does it appear to be a complete copy of your report?
There's numerous copies in here.
And by your report, I mean there's supplemental reports, witness statements, and so forth.
There's an entire package in here.
Okay. We'll mark that as Defense Exhibit 1, but
It may take me a while to find it. It may be on one of my supplemental.
okay, well, we'll go off the record and give you a chance to do that.
Time is approximately 11:54 a.m. We are off video record. Time is approximately 11:56 a.m. We are back on video record.
Lieutenant Hensel, you have looked at what we marked as Exhibit 1, which is a complete copy of your accident report package that you prepared with respect to the Bel accident. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And in looking at page 7-2-6, which is one of your supplemental reports, I believe,
Right.
you found that it notes that the Jeep had slowed.
Yes. Do you want me to read it?
No.
Okay, yeah.
You don't
It says
need to.
it said it's slowed to keep from striking the Camry. And
Okay.
everything.
And in terms of how fast you believe the Jeep was going, at the point the Thunderbird struck it, you've indicated that you believe it was about 30 miles an hour?
In the deposition, I gave that number, and that number came from probably our reconstruction parts, but I'm not sure where it
Okay.
actual came from.
Objection to the extent of misstates testimony.
In your deposition, to be fair with you, at page 111, let me let you refresh your memory by reading the answer that starts on page, on line 9. See if that refreshes your recollection as to how fast you believe the Jeep Cherokee may have been traveling when it was struck.
Do you want me to read it?
No,
Or do
sir,
want
you
to
just read it to
okay.
yourself. Once you've finished reading it, let me know.
Okay.
All right, so in reviewing your testimony that was given back in 2002, does that refresh your recollection as to your opinion about how fast you believe the Jeep was traveling at the time it was struck?
Right, I still believe that it wasn't stopped.
Yes, sir.
It decelerated to, was trying to get over
Right, and does the passage you read from your deposition that I showed you refresh your recollection as to whether you believe it was still going 30 or going 40 or going somewhere?
That
else?
doesn't give a numerical equivalency of the speed of the vehicle. That obviously came from something else that I haven't, but unless it was just my opinion of that's how fast it was going.
Okay. Do you believe that the Jeep was braking at the time that it was struck?
It was not braking, it was slowing down. So yes, it was decelerating in speed.
Do you believe that the back end of the Jeep was raised as a result of the deceleration that you've described?
No, I don't believe that.
Now, in terms of the Thunderbird that struck it, you've indicated that you believe it was fairly much a 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock orientation?
Yes, ma'am.
Straight on, in other words.
Correct, yeah.
Do you have an opinion about how fast the Thunderbird was traveling when it struck the Jeep?
The original rate, we had witnesses putting it up around 70 or 80 miles an hour. The amount of deceleration, I don't know exactly what the speed was at the point of impact, but it did have some deceleration marks, some skid marks prior to the impact, and it also pushed the Jeep and went underneath it, and there was significant damage. So I know the original rate of speed was between 70 and 80. How much it slowed down to at the point of impact, I can't tell.
Do you recall how long the skid marks were?
They're in the report. I don't know.
Okay. I think this is the measurement page, which is, I'm not sure that's what you need to look at to answer my question or not, but
Yeah. I'd have to do some subtraction to get the, you got a piece of paper. Put me on the spot here. I'm just gonna use a calculator.
well, that's a calculator. Another feature of my new phone I don't know how to work.
Yeah, that I've learned to use modern technology to not make an idiot out of yourself. It shows 67 feet from what I get off of the measurement charts.
Okay. And are those measurements you took?
Yes.
And did you take them with an officer by the name of Beckham?
Now these, I believe these were done, it was done twice. We did it with the ruler and the old-fashioned method at first, and then went out with a total station and did it at a later time with Officer Beckham.
It was Corporal Beckham, I believe, at the time.
Corporal Beckham, yeah.
Okay. So let me return to my question about whether you have an opinion as to how fast the Ford Thunderbird was traveling when it struck the rear of the Jeep Cherokee.
Have to do the speed loss equation, but doing it right now, I wouldn't be able to do that. I can't put a number on it right now.
Okay.
There is a way to show what the deceleration rate, you know, I'd have to have the factoring for the roadway, but
Sure.
there was some significant deceleration, so there was, you know, a speed loss prior to the impact.
But how much, you don't know.
I don't know.
So is it fair to say that you don't have an opinion about how fast the Ford Thunderbird was traveling when it struck the Jeep Cherokee?
I would say it would be at least 60 to get, you know, the damage and the distance that it pushed. There was quite a bit of impact.
How would you describe the impact you saw, impact damage you saw to the Jeep Cherokee?
It deformed the whole rear of the Jeep.
Okay.
As you see in Exhibit 1,
All right.
it's very clear that you got the corner of the roof is bent down and the rear of the Jeep is crushed into the axle.
And in fact, the impact from the Thunderbird pushed the Cherokee forward and into the Camry. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
How far forward did it push it?
I don't know.
Was it several dozen feet?
From the testimony of the witnesses, yeah, it was back away from the Jeep when it originally was hit, and it drove it forward.
Okay.
The significant thing to remember in this reconstruction is that if the Thunderbird submarined back behind the Jeep, it would have taken a lot of weight off of the rear wheels, and therefore the front wheels would be freewheeling down, so there'd be no resistance to the back.
Now, as I understand your testimony, you were able to observe the fuel tank of the Jeep
Yes.
Cherokee.
Yes, I did.
And it was made of metal?
Yes.
Do you know what the fuel tank was made of in the 1999 Jeep Grand Cherokee?
It was metal. You can look in the photograph and see the scrape marks are shiny.
Let's go off the record.
Time is approximately 12:06 p.m. We are back on video record.
Lieutenant Hensel, I'm going to show you 3 photographs that we've marked as defendants exhibits 2, 3, and 4, and ask if you recognize these as being the Jeep Cherokee involved in the accident in January of 2001 that we've been talking about, the Bel-Air vehicle.
Objection to the extent Lieutenant Hensel hadn't seen those photos before.
It looks similar to the vehicle. As to actually that being a vehicle, it doesn't. Well, I'm going to say it wasn't the vehicle, unless they did cut the roof off of it. So, yeah. Let me just go as far as say it's similar to one, to actually say that that's it. Was this taken down in Alabama?
Yes, sir.
Okay. If it was taken down in Alabama, I believe that would be it.
Okay. So if you look at Plaintiff's Exhibit 1, which is a view of the driver's side, and Defense Exhibit 2, I recognize that the quality of pictures isn't great, but does that appear to reflect similar damage?
Yeah. They cut the roof off. That's
Sure.
what makes the biggest difference in it. But I would say that.
But in terms of the
it
impact damage?
It looks like the same. Yes.
Okay. Did you make any determination as to how fast the Jeep Cherokee was still traveling when it struck the Camry in front of it, when it was pushed into the Camry by the impact from the Thunderbird?
I did not.
Now, you were asked some questions about a statement given by a witness by the name of Joe Ballou, I believe,
Yeah, I believe that.
and that would be exhibit
Right next to it.
is it 6?
That's correct. Yeah. Exhibit 6.
In looking at the statement, obviously you did not type statements while you were there on the scene that day, correct?
I believe it was transposed.
Okay. Do you know who did the transcription?
Me?
Did you actually speak to Mr. Ballou yourself?
Yes, I did.
Did he ever sign this statement?
The original written copy is probably signed.
Well, all the copies from the original do not bear a signature, correct?
No, the original written copy was signed.
You mean handwritten copies?
Yes.
Okay. this type statement was not signed,
I don't
correct?
believe so, no.
All right. And in looking at the statement, Mr. Butler asked you to read certain highlighted portions of this. He left out the last sentence of Mr. Ballou's statement, which is not highlighted. Would you read that into the record, please?
The last one not covered was, I never heard any other sounds from the Jeep.
Were you given the opportunity to review your entire deposition by Mr. Butler when you met with him yesterday?
I was.
Did you review it?
I cursory read most of it.
Okay. Now, I asked you some questions earlier about Corporal Beckham. Did Corporal Beckham actually perform the accident reconstruction in this case?
He utilized the total station to redo the scene.
So he went and took measurements of the scene and the vehicles with his total station?
Right, there was a bunch of us out there. We had to close the interstate down again. It was on a Sunday morning, I believe. We went out there and closed it down again.
All right, and so so the jury will understand a total station is what?
It's a instrument it's a surveying instrument, and it's used in the application of accident reconstruction to get a much more detailed and defined accident scene. More efficient than pulling tapes and measurements.
Now, in terms of Corporal Beckham's work, did he actually perform and write a report that was an accident reconstruction with speeds and estimates of speeds and so forth?
I don't recall. I know he produced the actual accident scene, but I'm not sure about, he may have done some speed calculations, but I don't recall.
Using a computer, do you know if Corporal Beckham performed speed calculations and accident reconstruction work?
On this scene, or?
Yes, sir, on this accident.
As I said, I'm not real sure extent of how much he did on that. I just recall doing the scene and us talking about different things. If he did a report, it would be in the file.
If he did it at the request of someone other than the police department, for example, if he did it at the request of the district attorney, it would not be in your file, would it?
Most likely I would have gotten a copy of it.
Do you remember getting a copy of it?
I don't. I mean, unless it's in the file, I don't remember half the file, but, you know, just from what I've been refreshed and what I've read through and seen, that's what I remember of it.
Okay. Now, as a result of this accident, were charges filed against the driver of the Thunderbird?
Yes, they were.
What charges were filed?
Vehicular homicide in the first degree.
And do you know what the results of that charge were, how it was disposed of?
I don't. My involvement, I went out and arrested him with a warrant in Gainesville, and that's the last I really had contact with him.
Now, in terms of the accident involving the 1999 Jeep Grand Cherokee and the Hearse that you briefly described, in fact, you did not investigate that accident on behalf of the Atlanta Police Department. Is that correct?
I didn't reduce it to writing, no.
The report was actually prepared by an Officer Coleman. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And did you take any measurements?
There were no measurements to take. It was a very simple accident.
Did you perform any calculations?
No.
So, in your estimate of how fast the Hearse was traveling, which I believe you said was 35 miles an hour in your estimate?
No more than 35 miles an hour.
No more than 35 miles an hour. That's based just on your eyeballing of the damage?
And the testimony of the driver.
Okay. And you talked to him at the scene?
Yes.
But you did not take an official statement from him, is that correct?
No.
That's correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Officer Coleman would have done that if it was done, since he was charged with investigating the accident, preparing the report.
Yeah, he would have. I mean, Coleman just wrote the report.
Right.
You know,
And you indicated that at the time of the accident, there was an incline involved, and I wasn't sure which way the incline was. Was the Jeep going up a hill or down a hill?
Jeep was going up the hill.
Okay.
It was just off the side of the road. It was canted at an upward attitude.
Okay. What maneuver was the driver of the Jeep Grand Cherokee trying to perform at the time her vehicle was struck?
She was attempting, I don't know how far into the turn, but she was going to turn right into a driveway.
Okay. Do you know if the vehicle was stopped?
She said she was stopped, yes.
Okay. So the Jeep Grand Cherokee was stopped, and the Hearse was coming from behind, going no more than 35 miles an hour, and it struck the rear of the Jeep Grand Cherokee.
Right. He tried to brake, but unsuccessfully.
Okay. And we looked at some photographs of the damage, which show that there's what you would call, I think you described as minor damage to the tailgate area of the Jeep Grand Cherokee
Yes.
and the bumper,
Yes.
and then damage where it appeared to you as though the tank was struck.
By the front bumper of the Cadillac. The Hearse.
And there was fuel leakage, but no fire.
Correct.
Now, you indicated in response to one of Mr. Butler's questions that you had never noticed before the January 26, 2001 accident on Interstate 85 whether the gas tanks of certain vehicles were visible from the rear. Did I understand that correctly?
I think that misstates testimony.
It may.
Yeah,
It may.
no,
Let me strike and try again. I believe you indicated in response to one of Mr. Butler's questions that before the accident you investigated in January of 2001 involving the Jeep Cherokee vehicle, you had not seen a gas tank directly hit by another vehicle.
I think that misstates testimony. I think he said that he knew that after the wreck that where the gas tank was located, but didn't say anything about what he knew before that.
Okay, well, let me just ask you this.
Okay.
Before the Belli accident, had you seen a vehicle accident where you believed that a gas tank had been struck directly by another vehicle?
I may have, but it did not register of anything of significance until I witnessed the Belli case. Okay.
And you indicated that you believe also in the accident involving the 99 Grand Cherokee and the Hearse, you believe that the gas tank was directly impacted by the striking vehicle, correct?
Yes.
Have you seen that on any other accident since the Belli accident in 2001?
Not that I recall, but it should be noted that I was promoted to sergeant and left that unit, and I've been an administrator, I've been out on the street, but not actively investigating accidents. I haven't noticed any gas tank ruptures since that point.
When did you leave the, I think it was, you were in the accident reconstruction unit or the fatality
Yes.
investigation unit?
Yes, ma'am.
When did you leave that job?
I was promoted to sergeant, I believe it was 2004.
And how long were you in that job before 2001?
About 5 years.
Okay, so you served in that unit from about 1997 to 2004?
Yes, 97, 98, somewhere in that area.
Okay. And so having been promoted out of that job since 2004, have you done any actual hands-on investigation of accidents since your promotion?
Oh, yeah. I supervise the road officers. I go out, especially when there's fatalities, I go out to make sure that the protocol is handled and the scenes are maintained and that the proper investigation techniques are taken care of.
But in terms of the responsibility for taking the witness statements, preparing the reports, doing the measurements, doing the accident reconstruction, those are done by members of the staff you supervise?
Yes, ma'am.
And now you're in a different job altogether?
Now I'm a criminal investigations commander, so I'm just making sure that, you know, the investigators do their job right.
Does your job now involve supervision of officers who investigate traffic accidents?
No, but I'm still in the precinct and I'm still out on the road occasionally, so I'll still poke my head in to make sure that the accidents are carried out properly.
Okay. Do you know the relative weights of the Thunderbird and the Jeep Cherokee which it struck?
I don't, I mean, we could Google it and we could find out, but I don't know.
I think that's all the questions I have for you. Thank you, sir.
You're very welcome.
I've got a few. We can go into them now. They're not many, or we can take a quick break.
No,
Whatever you want to do.
we'll go ahead on. If it's good for everybody else, I mean,
Let's power through. Lieutenant Hensel, Chrysler's lawyer asked you some questions about the extent to which you actually wrote the report on that 1999 Grand Cherokee that was involved in the rear-end collision. Do you remember those questions?
recall them, yes.
When you told us about that wreck, were you relying on your training and experience?
I was.
Chrysler's lawyer asked you some questions about the Camry that was hit by the Bel-Air Jeep in that collision. Do you recall those questions?
I do.
I will show you some pictures here that I need to mark, and I don't know what number I'm at.
I think 11 was the last one that you
I
marked.
think that's right.
Yeah, you had 11 was the highest number.
All right. Hang on a second, and I'll do that again so we got a quick feed on it. Miss Owens?
Oh, thank you.
Lieutenant Hensel, I will now show you some three pictures marked Planners Exhibits 12, 13, and 14. Do these appear to be pictures of the Camry that the Jeep got pushed into in the Bel-Air wreck?
Yeah, it appears that they, yes, sir.
Now, if you look at the second picture here, does that show that the Camry was hit in the rear?
Yes,
And if you look at the third picture, this is taken from the underside of the Camry from the back looking forward. Is that correct?
that's correct.
Can you identify the gas tank in this picture?
Oh, yes, I can.
Is the gas tank in this picture forward of the rear axle or behind the rear axle?
Well, this has a rear suspension system, but it is forward of the rear suspension system.
And did this gas tank, which was forward of the rear suspension system, rupture or leak or get crushed when it was rear-ended?
No, it did not.
Chrysler's lawyer asked you some questions. I won't move from those.
Oh, okay.
Chrysler's lawyer asked you some questions about any charges filed against the driver who rear-ended the Jeep Cherokee in the Bel-Air wreck. Do you remember those questions?
I do.
I think you said that that person had been charged with a vehicular homicide. Do I remember that right?
That's correct.
But you don't remember whether it was reduced to conviction?
I had no, it never went to trial that I know of.
Is the charge vehicular homicide, is that because somebody died in the wreck, that it gets the homicide part of it?
Objection to the form of the question.
Yes.
Now, if the gas tank in the Jeep had not been located at the rear of the vehicle, but had instead been located forward of the rear axle, based on your experience, is it much less likely that the gas tank of that Jeep would have been crushed?
Objection to form foundation.
Yes.
If that, based on your experience, if the gas tank in the Jeep Cherokee had not been crushed, is it much less likely that there would have been a fire in this wreck?
Same objection.
The tank would have remained intact, therefore the contents wouldn't have been dispelled into the air.
Then there would have been no fire, right?
That's
Objection to
correct.
form of the question.
Did you say that's correct?
That's correct, yes.
Chrysler's lawyer asked you some questions about meeting with me yesterday. Do you remember those questions?
Yes, sir.
I came down to the Zone 2 precinct and met with you at your office. Is that right?
That's correct.
We sat around a little table and went over some of these documents.
That's correct.
If someone from Chrysler had come to meet with you at your office, would you have met with them just like you met with me?
I guess I would have.
You described, I think, the impact on the Belleye Jeep Cherokee as significant. Is that right?
I believe that would my characterization, yes.
Did the tank leak in that significant impact?
In the Belleye,
Yes.
I believe it was more than a leak. It was it erupted.
You described, I think, the impact on the 1999 Grand Cherokee as a low-speed impact. Is that right?
Section
I
form
did.
the question.
Was the impact on the 1999 Jeep Grand Cherokee a minor impact?
Section the form of the question.
I consider it a low-speed impact, a minor impact, yes.
Did the tank leak in that collision too?
It did.
Does that suggest to you that the problem is not just the speed of the impact, but the location and vulnerability of the gas tank?
Section the form of the question.
Yes, it is.
Chrysler's lawyer asked you some questions about whether Mrs. Belleye or the daughter Nicole Belleye had been alive in the fire in that wreck or were killed by the impact. Do you remember those questions?
I do.
I think you said that it wasn't really your job and you couldn't say whether Mrs. Belleye or little Nicole Belleye were killed by the impact or the fire.
That is correct.
Now, as to Mr. Belleye, is there any doubt at all as to whether he was killed by the impact or killed by the fire?
Section the form of the question.
No doubt at all in my mind.
How do you know that?
He got out of the vehicle under his own power and was fully engulfed in fire and subsequently died 3 days later in the intensive burn unit.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Just a couple of questions. I think we'll be through, Lieutenant Hensel. You indicated that you went twice to the hospital to speak to Mr. Belleye, or attempt to speak to Mr. Belleye, and you were not ever able to talk to him, were you?
That's correct. Yeah, I
He
did
was
that.
unconscious and not able to speak to you.
Yeah, let me just clarify though. The unconscious, I'm not sure if it was a drug induced by the doctors or by anything else. So
Okay.
normally they told me in burn patients, severe burn patients, they keep them sedated so they're not fighting the treatment.
At any rate, you were not able to ever speak to him because of his medical condition.
That's correct, yes.
And in terms of Mr. Belleye's cause of death, do you have any information about what that was from the medical examiner's office?
I did see one thing in my report about notification from the ME. I am not sure, it was not a report from the ME, but that he came to his injuries in the burn unit. To answer your question, no, I never got a official notification from the ME's office to his cause of death.
Thank you, sir. That's all I have.
No further questions.
Time is approximately 12:28 p.m. This concludes today's deposition of Jeff Hensel. We are off video record.